Hi, my name is William Intriligator, and I'm the music director and conductor of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about a piece of music that you're going to hear, or maybe you've already heard, and that you're going to create art inspired from. And we're so excited that you're part of this art and music program. And as 8th graders, this is just the first year you can be involved in, and we hope that you're involved for many years. This year we wanted you to listen to the piece called The Grand Canyon Suite by Ferdi Grofé. The name Grofé doesn't sound American, but he was born in New York and was an American composer. And one time he was in Phoenix and had some friends convince him to wake up early and drive to the Grand Canyon, like even before dawn, to see the sunrise in the Grand Canyon. And this was such a spectacular experience for Grofé that the next day he started writing a piece called Sunrise. Well, then years later he decided to expand that Sunrise piece into a full suite for orchestra. It's almost like a symphony for an orchestra. It has 5 separate movements, 5 separate pieces, and it lasts about 35 minutes long. So the Sunrise is just the very beginning of it. And so this was years after his visit to the Grand Canyon. He decided to write the entire Grand Canyon Suite. So there are 5 movements altogether, and they almost depict a day at the Grand Canyon over the 5 movements. You have the sunrise, then there's the movement called the Painted Desert, where just briefly, it describes the scene of what it's like around the Grand Canyon, those sort of muted colors that you get in the American Southwest. But the longer you look at them, the more richness that there is there, the variety of the colors there. It's so fascinating that he specifically mentions color here, and so it's so perfect for this project of art and music. The Painted Desert. So that's the second part. It's just depicting the desert and how you're experiencing it. And then the next part of the musical day, so to speak, at the Grand Canyon is when you go down the trail into the canyon itself. And to go down the trail, you actually have to ride a donkey. And so this movement, the third movement, is called On the Trail. It's sort of dominated by the idea of you riding a donkey. It even begins with the sound of the orchestra playing what basically sounds like the donkey's bray. Yaw! And you'll hear that over and over again in this piece. Yaw! And then you'll hear it'll be played by the solo violin. It'll be played later again by the full orchestra several times. Then you'll also hear the sound of horses' hooves, which the donkey's hooves actually. And you'll hear a very familiar, possibly sounding melody. Probably you'll recognize it from cartoons. Bum, blum, 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 blum. You're like probably nodding your head. Oh, I know that one. That's originally from this piece. Grofé was the first one to ever write that. It's probably been used in countless cartoons. Anyway, that is part of the melody of the On the Trail, just depicting that lovely descent into the Grand Canyon on the trail. The fourth movement is Sunset, and it's calm and beautiful and has just a wonderfully romantic kind of feel to it. I almost had a feeling that in Grofé's mind, maybe he wasn't alone on this day journey to the Grand Canyon. Maybe he was with his sweetheart or something like that. Because it definitely has a sort of romantic quality, almost schmaltzy kind of quality to it. Now you'd think that the sunset would be the final movement, but it's not. The last movement happens after we're asleep probably, but it's called Cloudburst, and it depicts an incredible storm over the Grand Canyon. And you can just imagine seeing one of those scenes of the beautiful clouds over the desert sky in the southwest, and seeing one of them maybe being black and just cracking open with lightning and thunder, and you hear the most incredible musical storm depicted in this last movement. And then at the end, sort of sense of, oh, the storm is over and we made it through it, and what a great day it's been, and sort of ending with almost like a sense of triumph. Just a little bit more now about each movement briefly. The first movement, Sunrise, begins extremely quietly. If you want to hear it at all, you're going to have to crank the volume up, because it starts with just the sound of an extremely quiet timpani drum rolling. You know, the big kettle drums? Those kettle drums have always fascinated me for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that they are the instrument that can probably play the loudest and the softest of any instrument in the entire orchestra. That's amazing to be able to play the loudest and the softest. So the extremely soft timpani roll starts this piece, and then you'll just hear this like little, the violins play this note extremely high. It's called a harmonic, where it just sounds like a whisper. And then you'll hear the sound of music literally rising. You know, it's called sunrise. So you'll hear something that sounds like slowly rising scales, and then it gets more and more rising, rising, rising. It repeats it. You'll also hear this little sound of muted trumpets going like beep, 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 beep. And it's supposed to sound almost like little crickets or something, like, you know, if it's the sunrise, this movement literally starts in the dark, where it's still night, and it's the early morning, but it's dark like night, and so you'll hear crickets at night. And then gradually the sun finally comes up, and you hear this beautiful little melody in a piccolo, the little piccolo flute. And so then other instruments come in, and it gets slowly louder and slowly faster, and it's very just beautiful. And actually it gets so fast at the end of that movement that it just starts to run away. It's like full daylight suddenly. The second movement is the Painted Desert movement. One of the things that impresses me about this movement is the use of the more unusual instruments. There's a section where violas are featured quite a bit. And overall, there's some unusual musical colors that he's trying to bring out of the orchestra. But they're sort of muted, but beautiful, just like in the desert, the colors of the desert. The third movement I described already quite a bit about. There's one section about On the Trail that I didn't mention, which is that there's this one part where it sounds like a little music box is playing. And that's when you're riding the donkey down the trail, and it's like you stop, and there's like a little log cabin, and you stop for a little refreshments, and there's a music box playing in there. That music box-like sound is made from a very special instrument as well, called the celeste. It looks like a small piano, but it's instead of a piano which strikes strings on the inside when you hit a key, it strikes bells, tuned bells, and so it has that special music box-like quality. Another thing about the On the Trail movement is that as you're going down, it's not all bum, blah, 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 blah. At one point, there's sort of a cowboy-like song, ba-dee, ba-da, ba-da-dee-da, which almost becomes sort of like the theme of the whole Grand Canyon suite, because it comes back again in the last movement. That sort of represents us riding the donkey. And then at one point you'll hear the sound of where you come to like a waterfall or an oasis as you're going down, and you'll hear this very soft like just rustling of water, and you'll hear that melody of the cowboy in the trombones. It's very beautifully scored with there's just so many different colors musically in this piece, with harps and celestes and solo instruments and so many different things. It's incredible. Yeah. The strings play a prominent role in the sunset movement. And I'm not sure what else to mention about the sunset movement. I already mentioned that I thought that it was sort of sentimental and romantic as well. There's a lot more to it than that, I'm sure. I'd have to go back to my score and catch up on that one a little bit. But the last movement, Cloudburst, I'll mention a little bit more about that. It starts very calmly, because we're still coming out of the sunset. And it doesn't start with just a big bam crack of lightning or anything. There's a sort of like almost like a sense of warning or ominousness. I don't know. Yeah, ominousness. There's a solo cello that plays a melody, just like a little fragment of some music that gets faster and faster. And then you hear this sort of plucking of the strings simulating raindrops. And eventually the storm starts. So it starts really slowly, and eventually it gets very violent, very loud, and he calls for a particularly special percussion instrument called a wind machine. And so when you hear the recording, if you hear something that sounds like that's the wind machine. And by the way, it's fascinating to see a wind machine in action. What it basically is a giant wooden cylinder wrapped in canvas, and that has a huge handle. And then the canvas rubs up against another piece of canvas that's sort of stationary. And so this giant wooden wheel basically is spun at different speeds to create the sound of wind, and it's basically two pieces of rough canvas fabric rubbing up against each other. That's really cool. Yeah, and it's, again, there's like violent thunderclaps in the timpani drums. It's such a contrast from the way the timpani started the piece in the sunrise, very calmly with a soft roll. But very violent parts for the timpani and bass drum and others. So the percussion instruments in this last movement really help contribute a lot to the storm. I think you're going to like this piece a lot. The Grand Canyon piece became Freddie Groffet's most famous piece, especially that movement on the trail, which has been played so many times and used in countless cartoons and TV shows and movies. I have a little personal connection with Groffet in a sense, in that I grew up in a part of Los Angeles not too far from where he lived, literally just like he lived a few blocks from my house that I grew up in. So sometimes when I would go for walks, I would pass his house and my dad would point out, oh, that's Freddie Groffet's house. By that time he had passed away, but I liked imagining him sitting in that house. There was a window on the second story looking out over the ocean. It had a really beautiful view, and that was where his desk was, where he wrote his music, supposedly, so I like imagining that. I hope you enjoy the Grand Canyon Suite, and I can't wait to see the artwork that it inspires in you.